Even though this is primarily a channel focused on gaming, I like to throw in a video about visual novels now and again. And that's because I really like visual novels, and I have for a while now. In general, the visual novel fanbase, particularly in the West, tends to be an offshoot of the anime fanbase. However, that wasn't my experience. In fact, I only really started enjoying anime after I got into visual novels. So I'd like to talk a bit about how I got into visual novels and what keeps me reading them. To start off, I have to talk a little bit about my childhood. See, I was always an avid reader. My parents would often read to me before bed when I was very little, and I grew up on Sesame Street, so I was actually a fairly competent reader before I even started kindergarten. I think that learning to be comfortable with reading early on really helped me develop a love for books. My proportionate skill at reading allowed me to have a fairly wide range of books available to me at any given time, and I never really had to worry about picking up a book and it being too difficult. A lot of my friends who didn't like to read growing up didn't actually dislike reading. If they found something that suited them, they'd be just as voracious as I was. It's just that because they didn't read all that often, most books were either too childish for them or were too difficult for them to just experience. What I mean by that is, when you have to focus on any piece of writing just to understand it, it's a lot harder to enjoy it, and it's damn near impossible to lose yourself into a flow state. And that's what I consider to be the most enjoyable part of reading. A good example of this idea is an essay I had to read in a college-level Shakespeare course. The essay was titled, "In Search of the Bear, Spatiotemporal Form and the Heterogeneity of Economies in a Winter's Tale." My favorite line from that essay is, "In an ostensibly successful psychoanalytic explanation of the archaic content that makes up or compensates for the gaps and deficits in spatiotemporal continuity is unmasked as a repressed memory or wish that has only been shamming dead." The whole essay is filled with that type of bullshit. Now, I consider myself still to this day an above-average reader. I'm good at reading things and comprehending them. I reread that essay while writing the script for this video, and half the time I have no idea what the fuck it's talking about unless I really take the time to pick each sentence apart. And that's a real chore. Basically, this was the issue I saw many people have with reading when I was younger, just to a lesser degree. And I think I was very lucky to have learned to read well at a very young age, because I never experienced this problem. So let's fast forward a bit. As the years went by, I not only continued to read, but I started to get more and more into gaming. Early on, I was playing mostly browser-based Flash games, RuneScape of course, and a handful of titles on the Game Boy Advance and later the Nintendo DS. I wasn't really into gamer culture at all, but I was still developing a love for video games and, tangentially, a love for technology. At this point, I was also starting to enjoy the performing arts, both as an audience member and a performer. I was in the school choir from 6th grade for as long as I continued schooling. I was involved in theater from 7th grade until I graduated high school, and I was in the marching band as a drummer for all 4 years of high school. During this time, I was developing a love of music. I mention this because I think it's important. I believe that my love of stories, my love of gaming, and my love of music were all contributing factors to my current love of visual novels. It's just that at the time, they were separate interests for me. I guess it never really crossed my mind that these things could ever really intersect on a higher level. Fast forward again, and at this point, I'm pretty heavy into gaming and internet culture. I'm also at a point in my life when I was getting to be very introspective, and I wanted to actually solidify how I felt about things. It was at this point that I took a hard look at myself and figured out what my principles were, what my politics and religion were, and how I felt I should view the world. Of course, this wasn't some overnight thing, but this was the general mindset I had at the time. So one day I was browsing the internet and I came across someone referring to a project called Katawa Shoujo. But the way I heard it described was, the crippled dating sim made by 4chan. Needless to say, my curiosity was piqued, and I just had to see what this was all about. I went into my first ever visual novel basically expecting a massive shitpost, and was floored by what I actually encountered. I realized pretty quickly that Katawa Shoujo was actually a serious project. If you've never read it, the opening scene is absolutely fantastic. You know what? I'm actually going to show you. While I'm reading, pay attention to everything. The music, the art, the sound effects, and those little hints of foreshadowing all come together in a way that just hooked me. A light breeze causes the naked branches overhead to rattle like wooden wind chimes. This is a popular retreat for couples in the summer. The deciduous trees provide a beautiful green canopy, far out of sight of teachers and fellow students. But now, in late winter, it feels like I'm standing under a pile of kindling. I breathe into my cupped hands and rub them together furiously to prevent them from numbing in this cold. Just how long am I expected to wait out here anyway? I'm sure the note said 4 p.m. Ah yes, the note, slipped between the pages of my math book while I wasn't looking. As far as cliches go, I'm more of a fan of the letter in the locker, but at least this way shows a bit of initiative. As I ponder the meaning of the note, the snowfall gradually thickens. The snowflakes silently falling from the white painted sky are the only sign of time passing in this stagnant world. Their slow descent upon the frozen forest makes it seem like time has slowed to a crawl. The rustling of the dry snow underfoot startles me, interrupting the quiet mood. Someone is approaching me from behind. Hiseo? You came? A hesitating, barely audible question. However, I recognize the owner of that dainty voice instantly. I feel my heart skip a beat. It's a voice I've listened to hundreds of times, but never as more than an eavesdropper to a conversation. I turn to face this voice, the voice of my dreams, and my heart begins to race. Iwanako? I got a note telling me to wait here. It was yours? Damn it, I spent all afternoon trying to come up with a good line, and that was the result. Pathetic. Yes, I asked a friend to give you that note. I'm so glad you got it. A shy, joyous smile that makes me so tense I couldn't move a single muscle even if I tried. My heart is pounding now, as if it were trying to burst out from my chest and claim this girl for itself. So, here we are, out in the cold. Once again, the wind stirs up the branches. The cacophonous noise is music to my ears. Iwanako flinches ever so softly against the gust of wind. As it passes, she rights herself, as if supported by some new confidence. Her eyes lock with mine, and she lazily twirls her long dark hair around her finger. All the while, the anxious beating of my heart grows louder. My throat is tight. I doubt I could even force a word out if I tried. You see, I wanted to know if you'd go out with me. I stand there, motionless, save for my pounding heart. I want to say something in reply, but my vocal cords feel like they've been stretched beyond the breaking point. Hiseo? I reach up to try to massage my throat, but this only sends spikes of blinding pain along my arms. Hiseo? My whole body freezes, save for my eyes, which shoot open in terror. Hiseo! The beating in my chest suddenly stops and I go weak at the knees. The world around me, the canopy of bare branches, the dull winter sky, Iwanako rushing towards me, all those fade to black. The last things I remember before slipping away are the sounds of Iwanako screaming for help and the incessant clatter of the branches above. I don't know about you, but that scene still gives me chills. So at that point, even though it wasn't what I was expecting, I just had to finish Katawa Shoujo, and I enjoyed every second of it. I was pulled into this world and got to experience 5 heartwarming, emotional stories with some of the best designed characters I've seen in a while. After I was done, I had that little mini depression you get after finishing a good book or TV series, where you're kinda sad that you don't get to keep experiencing it. So I started reading through discussion forums, listening to the soundtrack on YouTube, and I even read a few fan-made epilogues. It was there that I learned the actual term for what Katawa Shoujo was, a visual novel. Now, contrary to what you may think, I didn't actually jump right into more visual novels at that point, but it was absolutely at that point where my interest in visual novels was first sparked. After all, Katawa Shoujo really did affect me a lot, and it was via a medium that I didn't even know existed. But over time, I would come across the occasional visual novel, and I would be more likely to try it out, and I found myself enjoying almost every single one. Even when I wasn't expecting much from them, I'd constantly be surprised. A good example of this is when I picked up the first volume of Nekapata, literally because of the memes. I actually ended up really enjoying it for the story and not just for, well, the sexy cat girls. With each visual novel I read, and even with each narrative-heavy video game or game/visual novel hybrid such as Sunrider, I found myself enjoying the medium itself more and more until I got to the point where I was just as eager to pick up a new visual novel as a new game. So that's how I got to love visual novels, but what is it about them that I like so much? Well, there are a few things that I think go into it. Firstly, remember that I've always loved books. I'm also one of those guys who will tell you that most of the time the books are better than the movie or TV adaptations. One thing that books have that movies will never have is a level of subjective descriptiveness. What I mean by that is when you're reading, you get a detailed explanation of how a character is feeling or how something affects them, and it fits in with the medium. That also leaves it open for the reader to imagine that experience for themselves. If a painting makes a character uncomfortable, the reader's imagination will come up with something that makes them uncomfortable, which allows them to get into that character's shoes just a little bit more. Something like movies, on the other hand, while they do have a lot of really neat tricks to convey emotion, can't quite match that level of specificity without having narration or awkward exposition. While a skilled director and a skilled actor can absolutely make a character believable, it's not always possible to get the viewer to empathize quite as much with them. Let's go back to the example of a painting that makes a character uncomfortable. In a movie, they have to actually show the painting. But what if the viewer just happens to not find it creepy at all? What if it just looks kinda silly to them? In pure text, the mind will fill in the blanks with something the reader themselves finds creepy, while film doesn't have that luxury. But as I mentioned before, another thing I grew to love in my adolescence was music, and that's one area where books are at a natural disadvantage. Music has this uncanny ability to invoke emotions and memories, and for quite obvious reasons, words on paper can't exactly have a soundtrack. But film, TV, and games do get to have soundtracks. I'll go on record saying that I believe music is woefully underutilized as a storytelling mechanism. There is so much that can be done with music to push the audience in a certain direction, to invoke or amplify certain emotions, or even to foreshadow future events. Any good director will be sure to utilize music within their project, but to me, it's rare to see music being used to its full potential. A great example of musical storytelling can be found in Celeste, where composer Lena Raine incorporated the themes of the game and deliberately crafted each track to fit the story. I'll leave a link in the description to a great video by a channel called Fanfare that goes over the music of Celeste and how it aids the story. Go check it out. I find that visual novels are uniquely capable of utilizing both the descriptiveness of books and the music of film, TV, and games. In a way, it's sorta like the best of both worlds. I can't overstate how much I believe that both of these things have so much storytelling potential, and I'm not sure if any other medium can really utilize them to the degree that visual novels can. And I find visual novels capable of crafting uniquely compelling stories. Another thing I find myself liking about visual novels is something that's a little bit more subjective. When it comes to stories, I tend to prefer character-driven stories to plot-driven ones. This may just be my personal experience, but most of the visual novels I've read, even when they have an interesting story to tell, take the time to focus on characters. I find that a lot of stories in general take the opposite approach, and while I don't hate it, I always tend to be a little unsatisfied with a story where the characters don't feel all that important. With visual novels, I often find myself getting attached to the characters, particularly when there's a romance plotline. Of course, I'm well aware that my waifus aren't actually real, and it doesn't compare with actual human connection, but having a level of attachment to these characters helps draw me into the story that much more. There's nothing that can really compare to the feeling of being totally immersed in a story, and good characters can absolutely get me there. For me, visual novels just tick all the boxes for what I like in a good story, and I'm very glad I was able to find and appreciate them. They may be just a niche interest here in the West, but you'd have a tough time finding a more dedicated fan base than visual novels. In fact, the visual novel fans I've interacted with have been some of the most passionate and accepting people out there. I'm a huge fan of the medium, and that only seems to get more and more true as I continue to read them. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, feel free to leave a like or a comment, and subscribe if you want to see more. The algorithm demands it. Also make sure to follow my Twitter for updates and memes at AndrewRotolo6, and follow me on Twitch at AdsGames. I've been doing some Beat Saber streams lately, trying to de-thickenize myself, so come follow me there. It's a lot of fun. Well, with all that being said, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you next time.